The story begins with Lee waking up in the morning to start running several kilometers. Then, in the afternoon, he practices punching several times, and in the evening, he begins 3 major exercises: bench press, squat, and deadlift, each with several sets and repetitions per set. To repeat this routine for days, the protagonist decides to quit his job. Someone asks him if he's gone mad, and maybe it would be better if he were, because one day, a status window appears before him saying, "The door to the apocalypse will soon open, time remaining until the end of the world, a few days, a few hours, a few minutes, a few seconds." Essentially, this notification tells him that the world is about to end. As the seconds continue to count down, we shift to a few days earlier, where everyone starts receiving messages that monsters have appeared near the mountains, so residents in those areas should evacuate immediately if they spot a monster. However, these monsters appear in various areas and mountains across the country. Then, everyone gets a live video link showing that monsters have indeed appeared, and this is 100% real, not a hoax. A boy very close to the monster says in fear that there really is a monster, and as the monster notices the boy's presence, he tells the viewers he needs to get a little closer. But the viewers or followers tell him to look behind him, yet the monster is already very close to the boy because he thought the monster couldn't move. Hearing the boy scream, Lee, who had been watching the broadcast, curses in shock. He also wonders why the video looks so realistic, but then he realizes that he's still receiving disaster warning texts, making him question what's really happening. However, Lee, who is several years old, after seeing the signs of a trap, says life has been hard enough, and now they're talking about monsters no one will believe in. With a sigh, he mentions that there have been too many fake videos like this lately, but at the same time, he realizes something. We then see that it's a small monster trapped in one of the traps, but upon seeing the creature, he wonders why there's a monster there. He feels a little scared and thinks he should be in math class. However, when the monster sees Lee about to leave, it starts growling before showing a rather friendly expression. Seeing this, Lee realizes the monster is asking for his help. Despite the monster's efforts to be sweet and ask for help, Lee is still very scared. But seeing the monster's glowing eyes, Lee tells himself that he's human, while that's a monster, and no one is kind enough to show compassion to a monster. With his eyes closed, Lee says he can't help the monster, even though it looks at him with hopeful eyes. However, the monster shows a photo, as if to say it has a family at home. Then, the scene shifts, and Lee is seen looking very surprised because there's a silver goblin pill in his hand. Once consumed, the pill grants power. Lee obtained the pill after he finally helped the monster and even received a reward from it. He couldn't believe that the creature was actually a monster. But holding the system, he wonders what the silver goblin pill really is and whether the system is some kind of hologram. When the system says he should consume it, Lee wonders who would eat something so suspicious. At the same time, urgent news appeared on television about the sudden emergence of large, unknown structures resembling towers across the world. Additionally, the news reported that contact had been lost with the United States military forces that had entered these towers. The news anchor stated that the appearance of monsters and these unknown towers indicated that the apocalypse had truly begun. While Lee was on high alert due to this news, a sudden explosion occurred outside his apartment. He quickly turned to see what had happened, where people outside were running, some pointing towards a large tower that was beginning to appear. The television news then reported that a large tower had also appeared in Korea. Seeing this, Lee clenched his fists tightly, looked back at his system, and remarked that he wasn't sure if this was the right decision. While taking the pill, he said it would be the only time he would do something so crazy. After swallowing the pill, his body began to emit a blue light, and the system informed him that he had unlocked the Sage's status window. The Sage's status window provided the user with the highest survival index in the current situation. After that, a book-like object slowly started to materialize in front of him. Once Lee held the object, he began to open it, and the book emitted a strong blue light. A system called Guide told him that the gates of the apocalypse would soon open, and the time remaining until the apocalypse was being counted down in days, hours, minutes, and seconds. The guide also provided him with suggested missions, strength training, cardiovascular training, and learning kendo. Then, we move to the present day, where Lee had begun following the guide's recommendations, abandoning all other activities for several days to focus solely on training. After the apocalypse arrived, he was transported to a completely different place. In the forest, at that moment, a creature emerged from the bushes. Seeing it, Lee wondered if it was a monster, as it looked cuter than he imagined, a raccoon-like creature with a single horn. However, the one-horned raccoon suddenly changed its expression to something very menacing and quickly leaped towards Lee. But with the basic swordsmanship skills Lee had, it was enough to defeat the monster. The system message read, "You have killed the one-horned raccoon, you have gained experience." As the raccoon's soul ascended to the heavens, Lee commented that the raccoon was defeated with a single basic Eskrima strike, indicating that the raccoon was quite weak, perhaps because it was a tutorial monster. However, Lee also realized that using basic Eskrima consumed MP, and he had only a small amount of MP, allowing him to use basic Eskrima only 5 times. This meant he needed to conserve as much MP as possible while hunting monsters. Then, Lee began to eliminate several more one-horned raccoons. You have gained experience. You are now level 2. You have received HP and MP. When you level up, you receive points that can be used to enhance your stats. Points remaining, 2. Upon seeing this notification, Lee was quite pleased and mentioned that he had just leveled up, and it was just in time since his mana was almost depleted. But then he noticed that the remaining points notification window started to disappear. Adjusting player level. You are now level 1. Knowledge burden. Since you have the Sage's status window, you will level up more slowly compared to other players. Lee, shocked to see this notification, said there was a penalty for having the Sage's status window, and he couldn't believe that the level he just gained had been taken back. He also wondered when he would be able to level up again. Feeling that this was a very unfair advantage, Lee opened his status window and was surprised to see something different. He still had remaining points. Lee thought that if his assumption was correct, this wasn't a penalty but a beneficial bug. After that, Lee began killing monsters again to gain experience and level up to level 2. However, due to the penalty, he dropped back to level 1, but still had remaining points to increase his stats. Lee was very pleased and mentioned that the higher the level, the more experience is required for the next level. So, it was easier to increase his stats this way than to level up normally. Lee then decided to enhance his stats. He had 4 options: energy, agility, sensitivity, and strength. Strength and agility were the best choices for a swordsman because strength would increase attack power, and agility would enhance speed and reflexes. However, the most needed stat at that moment was sensitivity. His sensitivity increased by 4 points after enhancing that stat. Quickly, he took down another one-horned raccoon. Lee said that the one-horned raccoon was not as strong as he expected from a tutorial monster since he could defeat it easily even with basic stats. Recalling the guide's advice to kill as many monsters as possible, Lee wondered how many one-horned raccoons he could find within the given time. However, it became easier to find them now that his sensitivity was higher, and he felt he could sense some kind of aura with his increased sensitivity. But after Lee managed to defeat all the monsters, a level 2 one-horned raccoon appeared behind him. While wondering what kind of monster it was, the one-horned raccoon attacked him with high speed. However, Lee managed to dodge the attack and noticed that the monster was quite fast and behaved like a beast. Lee wondered if it was the boss. As Lee prepared himself, the one-horned raccoon attacked again with high speed. However, Lee successfully defeated it. You have defeated the one-horned raccoon boss. You have completed a hidden mission. Reward, gold. After Lee finished and received the notification, he looked at the monster and mentioned that it turned out to be at that level. But at that moment, the tutorial had ended. He didn't expect that time would feel so long. As Lee continued, he suddenly fell silent because he was now in a completely different place with more people around him. But at that moment, someone on a loudspeaker welcomed everyone, informing them that they had successfully completed the tutorial and were currently in the tower's lobby, in Area C. Hearing the voice, Lee began to look around and realized there were men and women around him. He wondered if they had all completed the tutorial and been sent there. Everyone seemed panicked, which was understandable given that the entire world had changed in just one day. If he hadn't known that the world was ending beforehand, he might have panicked like them. Clenching his fist, Lee told himself that he had to stay calm because he needed to get out of there safely. Then, we switch to a girl who asks where they are. Someone responds that they are in the Tower of the End. After hearing the answer, the girl looked at who was speaking, and it turned out to be a small Sniffles who began greeting everyone. Sniffles said that he was the guardian of the tower and the guardian of the lower floors, and his name was Sniffles. The people, seeing and hearing him, were very surprised and said that he appeared out of nowhere. Someone asked if he was a little kid in a Sniffles costume. However, Sniffles, while sighing, said that this was a normal response. But at that moment, he was interrupted by Lee, who asked if he could ask something because if this was truly the end of the world, then what should they do? That event left Sniffles quite surprised, who then pointed to Lee and said that it was a good question. Meanwhile, with a changed expression, Sniffles mentioned that the players there would participate in a game with their lives at stake, causing the humans to start sweating coldly as their lives were on the line. However, Sniffles continued to tell them that all the humans on Earth were currently in the tower, and they had to cooperate on each mission on every floor to reach the top of the tower. Lee. Upon hearing this, Lee asked Sniffles if they could return to their normal lives after reaching the top of the tower. However, with a small smile, Sniffles replied that he didn't know either. Lee then asked what the point of climbing the tower was. Sniffles, in a very relaxed manner, replied that there was no need to search for meaning in everything, as only death awaited those who did not climb the tower. Additionally, Sniffles turned with a terrifying expression and said that many people had died in the tutorial. After hearing this from Sniffles, Lee wondered why he hadn't considered that, even though he knew it was just a tutorial. However, he was sure that many people couldn't make it through, and as he imagined some children and elderly people, he thought it was impossible, but he didn't finish his sentence because he was interrupted by Sniffles, who asked if anyone was willing to try to kill him because he needed to die to be able to go home. Furthermore, there was a special reward for anyone who helped him. Lee, after hearing this, wondered if it was a trap, because Sniffles didn't seem strong from the outside, but it was unlikely that he could win against someone at a certain level, so he decided to wait and observe for the time being. However, the guide told him to help the lower floor guard to return home. Lee, after seeing the notification, thought that it meant he could attack Sniffles since he had never been hurt by following what the guide said. However, he questioned whether it was worth doing something so reckless, so he began cursing because he didn't know what to do. But at the same time, someone said that they would do it because if Sniffles wanted to die, then he must kill him, and while Sniffles said that he could go home, the man, with a smile and drawing his sword, told Sniffles not to regret it because he would kill him in the most painful way. So he immediately started attacking Sniffles, but before his sword could hit Sniffles, he was struck brutally across the face, causing fear among those in the man's path as he fell lifelessly. Here we see who struck him. It turns out it was Sniffles himself, who had transformed into a muscular Sniffles, saying that he fought back by accident. This left everyone there silent because the man lay lifeless on the ground, and everyone there started running and screaming. Lee, seeing the incident, felt very scared and thought that if he had volunteered, it would have been the end for him. However, Sniffles said to everyone, laughing, that it was just a mistake, then asked if there were any other volunteers. But Lee, looking at the notification, thought that the guide had lied to him. And while Sniffles was covered in blood, he asked again who wanted to help Sniffles retire early, but no one dared to answer, including Lee, who, with a very frightened expression, kept thinking repeatedly that the tower guide had lied to him. However, at that moment, the system notified him that the Wise Eye status window had been activated. The Wise Eye status window allows you to see the status of others, and guides will be sent to you from time to time. However, because of this ability, you will level up slower compared to other players. Lee, after seeing the ability called Wise Eye, wondered with great surprise if there were other abilities besides the Wise Eye status window, and he didn't know why it suddenly appeared. So he used his ability on Sniffles, then smiled and said that was the reason, and while Sniffles, with a rather friendly face, kept asking, Lee stopped him by saying that he would do it because the tower guide hadn't lied to him. However, Sniffles, after seeing him, said that Lee was at level 1. Lee, after hearing this, asked if the level mattered when doing a good deed. Sniffles, with a changed expression again, replied that maybe it didn't. And while Lee was getting ready, Sniffles asked him to send him home quickly, but at that moment, they were stopped by a girl who told Lee to wait because it was too dangerous and someone had just died. However, this girl wasn't the only one, as others also said that the girl was right. He shouldn't do something so reckless, but Lee said there was nothing to worry about because he had a plan, which made the girl a bit confused. After that, Lee, who was getting ready with full confidence, told the girl that she would see something exciting. But at the same time, Sniffles, who looked cute, quickly changed back to attack Lee. As Sniffles' large fist approached Lee's face, he thought there was something strange in what Sniffles said. He was sure there were people in that place, but Sniffles said otherwise, which made him wonder if it was just a mistake. However, he then realized that the mistake of facing a level C monster and the fear of being killed was something done intentionally. The reason Sniffles mentioned the wrong number was because there were no people there from the beginning, but rather holograms of humans created by Sniffles. As Sniffles disappeared, he said to Lee that he was pretty good. Here, we see Sniffles' stats, who has the title of a low-level moderator, and his form was not the original because it was just a hologram that disappeared when it took damage. Before completely disappearing, Sniffles said to those who dared, "Good luck," and then he vanished entirely. After that, Lee realized that Sniffles left a small ball containing stat points, and as he picked up the ball, someone asked how he knew that Sniffles wouldn't kill him. Lee said that he happened to see blood dripping through the girl, so her face and clothes should have been covered in blood because of their close distance. That's why he thought it was all just a show. Of course, everything Lee said was just an excuse because he was actually using a sage's ability. However, at that moment, he was stopped by a Kim who said it was a waste for Lee to have the ball because he was just lucky. If he had noticed, he would have stepped forward. However, upon hearing this, Lee asked what he meant by waste. Kim, with a CU level, said that the fact that Lee was still at level 1 despite completing the tutorial showed that he was very weak, or couldn't kill anything and just ran away. Furthermore, he would just die quickly, so for the sake of humanity, he gave Lee the opportunity to hand over the ball to him. Lee, who was holding his ball tightly, wondered what was wrong with Kim and whether he was serious. However, at that moment, he crushed the ball, gaining 1 stat point, because giving up the ball wasn't his thing. Even so, Kim was very angry and said that for someone from the bottom, Lee was very greedy. He asked if Lee was trying to maintain his appearance based on his level, but Lee only told himself that, based on experience, the wisest thing to do was to avoid people like that, even though he didn't know how long he could keep doing it. After that, at the same time, the loudspeaker announced that their starting gold would be distributed, and they could use the gold in the store. Additional gold would also be given based on the number of monsters they had killed in the tutorial. The loudspeaker continued, saying that in that zone, the player with the largest amount of starting gold was, which surprised everyone, as they wondered if any of them had received that much. Kim, who received, started cursing because if he had known that would happen, he would have done better. His partner, June, who received, said that he didn't know who arrived first, but it must have been incredible. Lee, who received the largest amount of gold, told himself that the player who arrived first was him, and of course, he didn't plan on revealing that, since there was someone who was envious just because of 1 stat point. After the store opened, Lee, while browsing the store, thought there were 3 major things that could be done with gold: buying items, leveling up skills, or boosting his stats. He decided to increase his strength by 9, his endurance by, and his agility by, making all his stats, leaving a remaining amount of gold of. However, Kim was very angry, shouting about why leveling up skills was so expensive. Lee, who was behind him, thought that he also needed to level up his basic swordsmanship skills. So, after leveling up his swordsmanship, he decided to change his clothes because he couldn't keep wearing his sports uniform. However, at that moment, he was stopped by a level 3 girl named Isial, who said that she wanted to ask for advice. Lee asked why she was asking for advice from someone at level 1. Isial, with a smile, said that aside from his level, she noticed that Lee was very impressed by the girl's courage, but he used his ability to see the girl's stats, which revealed that she was from the healer class and had a lot of gold. With this information, Lee asked the girl how much gold she had at the moment. Isial answered honestly, and Lee realized that the girl was truthful, so he felt the need to hide the fact that he was using a secret trick. Lee then asked Isial if she liked exercising, and she replied that she didn't mind walking. Lee then said that it was likely that her endurance stat wasn't very good, which surprised Isial because it was true. Lee continued by saying that if she was lacking in endurance, it would be best for her to invest in it because even though she spent a lot of gold, she wouldn't be able to use the items for long. Isial nodded in agreement and said that she would follow his advice, but at that moment, they were interrupted by the loudspeaker announcing that the first floor mission would soon begin and asking them to form groups of 3. Players who didn't have a group would be placed in random groups, and they were given a few minutes to decide which group they would join. Lee, hearing the announcement, realized that he had thought there would be a group mission, but it came sooner than he expected. Then, June suggested that they tell each other their classes since they could see each other's levels. People began revealing their classes, and players started forming teams with the people they wanted. After that, Isial approached Lee to ask if he wanted to join her. She became the first member of Lee's team because there was no reason to refuse a healer's invitation. However, the other players' answers were the same, which was to refuse. Even though there was a healer, they might have been bothered by having to team up with a level 1 swordsman, and since the level 4 players were very relaxed, everyone had already formed their teams. The remaining players were, but she didn't have time to finish her sentence because the loudspeaker announced that time was up and incomplete teams would be randomly assigned. After the teams were randomly formed, the first floor mission began, where someone said that they were unlucky. We see who said those words. It was Kim, who said that he didn't expect to be in a group with Lee. Lee looked at him and felt that he also didn't expect Kim to be less popular than him when he was at level 4. He wondered if it was possible to cooperate with that man, but since the situation was like that, he had to try. He looked up and said that he had to survive in that place. We soon transition to a scene where they are observing a village because they have to complete the mission given by the system, which is to exterminate the kobold tribe within a certain time. However, Kim arrogantly told Lee that he would defeat the tribe and asked Lee not to get in his way. Lee reminded him that this was a team mission, but Kim threateningly said that he would allow Lee to follow him from behind. He asked why Lee was talking so much and called him a loser. Lee, realizing that Kim couldn't be changed, could only sigh and say that it was okay, and he would follow the man to see how well he did. As they began moving toward the tribe, Kim said that he would follow from behind, so why did Lee have to reveal unnecessary things when he only acted when someone was about to kill him? The girl watching the situation felt worried and wondered if the group would be okay. While Kim complained about the insects around him, Lee said that they really needed to complete this mission without any issues, so they continued walking toward the tribe. However, when Lee saw the insects and other small animals, he said that it was true that there were a lot of insects because they were in the mountains. While observing the insects and cutting some plants, he was stopped by aniRecap, who said that the kobold monsters should be strong. Lee said that perhaps the monster was stronger than a one-horned raccoon, but since they were still at level 1, it should be manageable. He also said that they needed to be cautious because they were in the final tower. At that moment, they saw a muscular figure with a tight abdomen and large legs, which turned out to be a high-level kobold monster. Seeing it, Lee became nervous and thought that the difference was too great. He said that the monster was clearly much stronger than a one-horned raccoon, so he asked Lee what they should do. Lee replied by saying that they should check the surroundings first because there might be more kobolds nearby. However, at that moment, the red-haired one started moving and told Lee why he kept hiding like a coward, and that's why he was still at level 1. Then, he jumped towards the kobold monster and delivered a powerful punch to its snout. This surprised both Joel and Lee, while the red-haired one looked very pleased. We see that the kobold was able to withstand the punch. The red-haired one, seeing the monster endure his punch, quickly prepared his left hand to strike it again. But Lee, watching the situation, said that he couldn't believe the red-haired one was so reckless and didn't expect him to be that stubborn. aniRecap began using her healing powers to assist the red-haired one. Lee, while turning back, mentioned that luckily, he didn't see any other kobolds. Then he noticed the red-haired one, where we saw the kobold's HP slowly decreasing. The red-haired one truly demonstrated their level of power, and with aniRecap's help, they might be able to defeat it alone. However, he wondered why the damage dealt was so low compared to his strength. Then, the guide informed him that kobolds are passive monsters that won't attack unless provoked. After reading the guide, Lee realized that the red-haired one was stirring up a hornet's nest for no reason. While putting down the guide, he mentioned that they still needed to capture some for research. However, as he continued flipping through the guide, he realized something important. Then we switched to the red-haired one, who was launching a powerful attack, telling the kobold that for God's sake, it should die this time. However, the red-haired one ended up hitting a tree because the kobold managed to dodge the attack. But by hitting the tree, the red-haired one caused it to fall and hit another kobold. This made the kobold of that level extremely angry. They were now in a more difficult situation, having to fight 2 kobolds at once. As the red-haired one tried to fend off the monster's attacks, he turned around cursing, feeling like he was in big trouble, so he had to ask for help from Lee, who had disappeared. The red-haired one, seeing that Lee was gone, cursed, calling him a coward for running away, but was interrupted by another kobold approaching with a large club. However, aniRecap inflicted a minor wound on the kobold, but at the same time, she stumbled on a rock, causing her to fall. She was quite nervous as she looked back and saw the kobold approaching with the large club, But at that moment, a fruit flew toward the monster and was pierced by a sword used by Lee to deliver a double attack on the kobold. However, the cuts made by the sword caused the kobold to react by turning completely purple and then exploding. You have defeated a level 6 kobold. The red-haired one, seeing that Lee had defeated the kobold, was very shocked, as was Jizian. But Lee, with a smile, said that it was not surprising because while the creature was eating all the fruits, they didn't touch that one. So he thought something was wrong and used the system to analyze the fruit, which turned out to be a poisonous apple. That was why the creatures didn't go near it. Moreover, the guide mentioned that kobolds are vulnerable to poison. Collect poison from the mountains and use it. Then, with a wide smile while holding the poisonous apple, he said that it was the key to the level 1 mission. While the red-haired one felt slightly uneasy and angry, Lee asked Isial if she was okay, to which she replied yes and thanked him. Lee said he didn't expect others to be drawn there by the red-haired one and that it would have been dangerous if he had arrived a little later. Joel, with a smile, said that he still arrived on time, so she thanked him because without him, they couldn't have done it. While the red-haired one continued listening to the conversation, Jizian asked Lee where he had gone. Lee told her that he did come, but he didn't finish his sentence because he was cut off by Kim, who was very angry and arrogant. The man called him a loser for taking advantage of the situation by hiding in a corner when things got really dangerous. After Kim threw a few punches, Lee just countered and caught the last punch. Moreover, Kim continued saying that he realized it when he saw him gulp down the stat points. However, Lee, hearing this, wondered what he meant by peloti, and while Kim walked away angrily, Lee wondered if he was crazy. Sighing, he said to himself that if he couldn't interpret the scene, he would be in bigger trouble. After that, we move to the kobold village where we see Lee easily taking down monsters using a poison-coated sword. But Kim, seriously, said that he was an expert in the punch scene, and those lowly monsters would never be able to stop him. While he continued struggling to defeat a single kobold, Lee had already taken down several of them. Kim saw this and started cursing, then wondered how he could do it so easily. However, not paying attention to the monsters, he took a heavy hit that caused him to fall to the ground, where the kobolds started beating him. While the monsters kept hitting him, Kim said it hurt a lot and begged for help. As he kept getting hit, Kim began to cry, but at the same time, he realized he was no longer being hit. The monsters that were hitting him stood still and then quickly exploded. As the pieces of the monsters fell to the ground, Lee extended his hand to Kim and said with a smile that he had covered for him for a while, then asked how he was feeling. Kim immediately changed his expression to one that was hard to explain and said to Lee that he was like a big brother. This left both of them completely shocked. After completing the mission, they returned to the lobby, where Kim, who was very worried, wondered what he had done. We see that he told Lee to serve him, calling him master. Meanwhile, Isial congratulated Lee for leveling up. Kim gritted his teeth and said that he called a level 2 novice master, and he would be doomed if that got out. However, Kim Se-jong was a true man and couldn't break his promise. Lee, noticing Kim's strange behavior, wondered if he should pretend or something. But Isial realized that no one else was there, so they concluded that they were the first. Lee said that it seemed they succeeded faster than the others because they managed to find the kobold's weakness by luck. However, Isial said that it wasn't luck because it was all thanks to their observation skills. She never thought of using poison. Lee, with a smile, said that if it weren't for her support, it would have been much harder. Still, he felt like a fraud. After a few minutes, the other groups began to emerge from the portal. Lee mentioned that it seemed the other groups had also returned. The arriving groups were Kim Jun and Juno, so they wondered if they also found the poisonous apple. They wondered if the other groups would return safely. After a few minutes, 2 people emerged from the portal. After exiting, they collapsed, injured and exhausted, on the ground. Isial, seeing them, asked what happened to the third person. With tears and remembering their third comrade, they said that only the 2 of them were left. After that, the loudspeaker announced that the first level mission was completed. Everyone was finished, but Isial shouted to wait because someone still hadn't returned. The loudspeaker informed them that a total of 6 groups had returned safely, while others had not yet come back. Lee, who heard this, thought that he hoped everyone could return safely, but 8 people dead was a very high number. He wondered how many more would die before they reached the top. Then, the loudspeaker announced that the initial calculations from the level 1 mission stated that the group that safely reached the end and the group that completed the first level first would each receive gold. Kim, who saw the reward with tears in his eyes and covered his mouth, said that they were really the first. However, Lee, who checked his status window, realized that he also received gold for both bonuses. Despite this, the amount felt small compared to the tutorial, but gold was a kind of guarantee for his survival in the future, so he had to save as much as he could. However, at the same time, someone asked which group arrived first. Lee then turned to look at a group and thought that he should reveal it since the group that arrived second already knew. When he raised his hand to answer the question, someone behind him said it was them, and we saw that Kim proudly declared that it was an obvious result, so they didn't need to feel bad. However, a boy who heard this asked if they were really the first group. Kim, who was very arrogant, asked why he reacted that way, as it seemed he was angry because they arrived first. The boy said that no, he just wanted to say something, but he didn't finish his words. Then, the focus shifted to our protagonist, who thought that Kim had forgotten the fact that he was hit by a kobold. However, at the same time, other participants started looking at Lee with evil glares, and some of them said to look at him, as he got first place but was only at level 2. Others said that he got gold without doing anything and asked if he didn't feel guilty about it. However, Icial interrupted and shouted that actually Lee, but she didn't finish her sentence because Lee said it didn't matter, as they wouldn't listen. So, with a determined look, he told Icial that she should show them later. Then, someone among the participants started clapping, and we saw that it was June from level 0, who said that they should calm down because they needed to focus on their survival. Here, we were told that he was an archer and one of the highest level players in this region. So, Juno, a swordsman, after hearing this, said that June was right, and they should keep fighting for those who had fallen. The other players started celebrating and cheering each other on, feeling that they could do it together. However, as they continued to cheer, we saw a fire that quickly turned red, followed by a message saying, "Warning." Lee, who saw the situation, felt confused and wondered what was happening as the torch's flame changed color. The loudspeaker informed them that the survival rate in the first level of Region C was below average, so they would activate a penalty mission. The loudspeaker also told everyone that the death mission would begin soon and asked the participants to choose a candidate in their minds. The player who received the most votes would undertake the death mission, and they only had a few minutes to cast their votes. If they didn't choose anyone, then a vote would automatically be given to themselves. The participants quickly realized that being selected here meant death, so they, with tense minds, started to focus on whom they should choose. However, at the same time, Icial told everyone that if they all voted for themselves, then no one would have to undertake the death mission. However, another player shouted that this could make them all have to undertake it. Meanwhile, others shouted that this wasn't the time to argue, as time was running out. In the middle of the crowd, a girl began to point at someone, and we saw that she pointed at Lee to be chosen. Icial, who saw the vote above Lee's head, said that it was too cruel. Juno, who seemed very nervous and silent, approached Lee to apologize, saying that they had to vote. Lee, with a fake smile, said that he didn't expect anything, but he felt a little confused because he didn't want to die, after all. However, Icial told the others that it was still not too late if they all voted for themselves. But Lee interrupted and said that it wouldn't work and that June was right, they didn't know if it would work. Besides, trust had already been broken, and as time passed, the votes above Lee's head kept increasing one by one, and he was sure there was more than one reason. The biggest one was that he was the only one with a low level there, so they had lost sight of the societal norm that the strong should protect the weak. However, their masks had fallen, and people were showing their true selves. We saw that Icial asked the others how they could do that to someone. Another participant asked, then what should they do, because they would die if they didn't vote. The girl arrogantly mentioned that she was certain she would die anyway because of her level. However, among them, the happiest was Kim, who with a wide smile, told Lee that he was sorry, calling him sir. After that, the loudspeaker announced that all votes had been cast, and the portal to the death mission was opening. Once the portal fully opened, people started saying that it was indeed real. While Icial was quite surprised by our protagonist, Kim laughed loudly and said that now he thought his problem would be solved if Lee went away. Meanwhile, as Lee walked towards the portal, it was said that the sacrificial lamb had been chosen, and the altar was prepared. Additionally, the people with guilty and relieved faces behind him gave him no choice but to ascend to Calvary. However, at the top of Calvary, there was no death, as the guide had informed him to participate in the death mission. It was suggested because he had a good chance of completing the mission, with satisfying rewards awaiting him. So, as he crossed the portal with a smile, he said that he was looking forward to the sweet reward. After Lee went on the death mission, the others waited like their comrades in the previous mission, which was then interrupted by June, who said that although brief, they had still been comrades who took care of each other and regretted parting this way. However, Kim, with his attitude, said that Lee got what he deserved, but Iceall overheard and asked what he meant. Kim replied that she could figure it out just by looking at Lee's level and that all he did was try to take advantage while leading the group. However, Iceall asked what he was trying to say because it was Lee's abilities that helped them get through the mission. But Kim shouted, asking what abilities she was talking about, because in his opinion, Lee was just lucky with his plans. But Iceall asked if he was sure that Lee hadn't saved him from nearly dying, which left Kim speechless. He then remembered what had happened and thought that maybe Lee indeed had some abilities and perhaps the ability to alter his displayed level, leading him to wonder if Lee could return safely. June, who overheard, mentioned that personally, he hoped Lee was as good as Iceall described, so that he at least had a small chance of returning. However, Iceall, recalling Lee's words that he would let them see with their own eyes, wiped away her tears and confidently said that she was sure Lee would return safely, and she believed in it. June heard her and, with a smile, said he believed Lee would do so. We then switch to another scene where we see Lee in the Kobold village. While looking at the rather gloomy village, he said that it felt eerie. However, he began to smile while looking at the guide and said that he had considered choosing himself if things didn't go well, and luckily everything seemed to be going his way. However, he recalled Kim's words and, with a bit of anger, said it seemed he needed to have a word with Kim. But at the same time, the hunting party of the Kobold tribe had returned. When they saw their slaughtered comrades, they began roaring in anger. Meanwhile, he spotted a kobold larger than the others, and the system informed him that the death mission would begin, kill the leader and the hunting party enraged by the death of their tribesmen. Shortly after that notification, the kobold chief began roaring, causing the other tribe members to attack. However, before the kobolds returned, the guide had informed Lee that the kobold leader was a dungeon monster and a high-level one at that. The kobold leader, like the other kobolds, was weak to poison. So, Lee quickly began crushing an apple with his hands, and while coating his sword with poison, he said that the leader monster at the top of the kobold hierarchy was an almost impossible opponent to defeat. If it had been someone else, they might have accepted their fate, but this time it was different because he was the one facing it. After he defeated all the low-level kobolds, he said that now all the supporting characters were dealt with, and the only one left was the leader monster from the deadly mission. He then quickly attacked the leader monster with his sword. However, the leader monster dodged, leaving Lee surprised because he hadn't expected a monster to have such abilities. But it was expected from a leader monster in a deadly mission. Yet, at the same time, the leader monster quickly started running with its tail between its legs at full speed. Lee then began chasing it, and while attacking the leader monster, he wondered how such a monster could be called a leader monster. Additionally, it seemed this mission was like an easier phase than expected, and anyone who got there could handle it, so Lee was quite relaxed and prepared to deliver the final blow by attacking the boss monster from behind. However, the attack had no effect on the boss monster, leaving Lee very confused. Simultaneously, the boss monster was staring intensely at the red moon, then quickly attacked Lee with its sword, causing a wound on Lee. The scene shifts to Kim, who, as usual, was very arrogant, saying that since they couldn't do anything for someone already dead, he, Kim Se-jong, would lead everyone through the remaining floors. However, while Kim was speaking, Cole was seen praying for the protagonist. Kim then asked him if he didn't know what death was, as it was clear the protagonist was already dead. Moreover, he asked why Cole was praying for him, questioning if he was praying for the protagonist to rest in peace. However, Iceall yelled at him, saying that even though the world was in such a state, at least Kim should have some awareness. Iceall also asked what Kim would do if Lee returned safely. Kim replied that it was impossible, and that there was no way someone like Lee could come back alive. As the portal reappeared, Kim asked Iceall if she was really going to act that way until the end. However, at the same time, someone exclaimed, "Yes, that's the portal," which shocked everyone. Then, all the participants began to turn towards the portal, where someone started to emerge. The people were very surprised, and some were even delighted to see Lee, who appeared to be healing his wounds. Then, the loudspeaker announced that the player who had participated in the death mission had returned safely, and with a wide smile, Lee said that he had returned. However, a few minutes earlier, the guide had informed our protagonist, "Please be careful, as the boss Cobalt's ability will increase when its eyes turn red." Then, we see Lee fighting the boss monster, whose eyes had already turned red. However, Lee, who was severely injured, began to retreat until he was cornered by a tree. While trying to cover his wound with his hand, he thought that he had to stop the bleeding and deliver one blow to the boss monster. He only needed to deliver one good strike. But when he saw the boss monster charging at him like a triceratops, he wondered how he could land that blow. After narrowly avoiding the powerful attack, Lee remarked that the boss monster had made a hole in the tree as if it were as soft as tofu. At that moment, he realized something and thought that although a sword might not be able to cut through a wall, a nail could penetrate it. He might have thought that a sword was merely a weapon for stabbing unconsciously. With strong determination, he looked at the monster and said that he needed to take advantage of the momentum while attacking. Lee then quickly leaped towards the boss monster, adding his own body weight to his attack. However, at the same time, the boss monster pressed its feet into the ground, jumped into the air, and launched a double attack. But Lee, concentrating all his strength at one point, delivered a strike towards the boss monster, successfully piercing it. After seeing his plan work, Lee smiled, and the system notified him that the piercing ability had been added to his basic swordsmanship skills. After completing the death mission, we return to the present, where someone starts walking, quickening their pace. We see that it's Isial, who is running towards Lee, saying that she knew Lee would succeed. However, at the same time, Isial collided with someone, causing her to be thrown off. While Isial was confused, we see that Lee was also confused because Kim was hugging him, saying that he knew Lee would succeed, calling him brother. We continue with the summary. Kim also mentioned that a simple death mission couldn't stop his brother, Lee, the strongest in the universe. However, Lee clenched his fist tightly, thinking that he really wanted to punch the man, but at the same time, someone interrupted and asked if he had really completed the death mission, expressing that he was glad to see Lee was okay. But if he had completed the mission, he should have gained a lot of experience, yet his level hadn't changed. This observation made the other players start whispering, saying that now that they think about it, Lee was still at level 2. While the other players continued discussing Lee's level, he angrily thought that he was used to all of this. Lee then recalled an exam he had faced as a child and said that the world wanted the weak to remain weak because his friends were whispering that it seemed Lee didn't pass the exam. Another friend mentioned that he probably cheated, so everyone started mocking him, saying that he must have cheated because a miserable orphan would never get the best score. Then we return to the present, where people are talking about how Lee might have been hiding somewhere and biding his time before coming out, like in the tutorial. Someone else said that made sense because he couldn't do anything with that level, so he must have been hiding somewhere, and while Lee heard those comments, he clenched his fists tightly, saying that he knew them well enough and that prejudiced people wouldn't change their views just like that. So he lifted his head and said to himself that what he needed to do now was, but he didn't finish his sentence because someone interrupted, saying that he shouldn't speak without thinking because he had proven that he survived the deadly mission. However, at the same time, our red-haired character started walking forward to shout that Isial was right, and the others not only failed to throw a party to celebrate the return of their brother, Lee, the strongest in the universe, but they even dared to spoil the mood. So he flexed his muscles and asked if they were crazy. Lee heard him and thought that Kim sounded like the craziest person to him, but he felt a bit calmer and still needed to ensure that everyone was safe in the tower. If he wanted that to happen, he had to show something convincing. So he caught everyone's attention and said that he needed to show them something, then took out an invincible sword, with rare series and high attack power. The people who saw that it was a rare weapon with high attack power said that it was basically a cheat key. The girl holding the sword mentioned that there wasn't even any information about the ancient longsword, but June told Lee that it was amazing he could carry a poisonous apple with him, and as Joel said, he was really incredible. However, Lee said that he was just lucky. King Hun Seon mentioned that having a valuable item like a gift was much more precious because it could help everyone survive, but Lee heard him and asked if he was saying that he would help everyone survive. With a smile, he mentioned that it seemed everyone had forgotten the fact that they almost got him killed. Those words made everyone fall silent, especially Kim, who even started turning his face away. However, Juno, biting his lip, told Lee that he was sorry. So he began bowing his head slightly and mentioned that he justified it by thinking it was inevitable, but in the end, it was pure selfishness because he thought as long as it wasn't him, everything would be fine. even though he knew that choosing Li when he had the lowest level was the same as secretly attacking him. So he bowed and said that they threw him into a deadly situation so they could live, and he was truly sorry, and with tears, he said that he was really happy Li came back alive. While Li remained in absolute silence, a girl with an arrogant attitude asked why they had to go that far because someone had to go, and even though Li returned with a rare item, everything was fine. But Juno heard her and asked how she could say that, and in a loud voice, asked if she didn't feel any guilt at all. The girl responded that it wasn't his place to say that because he also chose Li before anyone else. But at that moment, Li interrupted the conversation, saying that the reason he brought out the sword wasn't to punish them, but to prevent it from happening again. They must have realized during the voting in the deadly mission that the tower was trying to divide them and fuel distrust among them, causing conflict, and perhaps enjoying sending them to their doom. While everyone was stunned and silent, Li continued by saying that he believed his return from the deadly mission was an opportunity because he had proven that his actions could challenge the tower's intentions. June heard this and asked if he had a plan for the future. Li responded that he would find a way for most people to survive and would continue climbing the tower, higher and higher, and when they reached the top one day, they could reclaim their lives. Those words sparked a glimmer of hope in the hearts of everyone present. However, at that moment, Icial shouted that for that to happen, everyone there must join hands. Juno, who had witnessed the event, tearfully and with a bright light in his eyes, said that Li was a very generous person and they shouldn't judge him based on something so trivial. But at that exact moment, the rabbit said that this was a misfortune for the mission because it was a survival game. People who saw it asked if it hadn't left yet, while others said that this time they would also get stat points. However, Li, who had heard the rabbit, said that for a survival mission, what it meant was that this. He didn't finish his sentence because the rabbit quickly added that the mission for level 2 would involve the players in that place and would be a battle royale, causing fear among everyone present. However, with a friendly smile, the rabbit told everyone that because this was a lower level, it would be just a light taste for everyone, so they should stay enthusiastic. After that, the rabbit said it would explain the rules. The first was that in the level 2 mission, there would be players and duplicates, so there would be several people in total. The second was a condition that had to be met, they must kill all the duplicates. However, the duplicates would not only have the same stats but also the same memories. So, this would not be easy, and most importantly, the third rule was that there would be no reward for players who killed duplicates, but if a player killed another player, they could gain stat points and gold. In other words, this mission could be an opportunity for them, but the players who heard it said that it basically meant they were being told to kill each other. But at the same time, the rabbit prepared to snap its fingers and said that lastly, every few minutes, if no killing occurred, everyone would be summoned to the lobby and face a great disaster. Then, it snapped its fingers and began opening a portal from which a giant hand emerged, and while the huge monster started coming out of the portal, they saw that its level was not even visible, causing fear and terror among everyone present, including our protagonist. But at the same time, the monster launched an attack, leaving a massive fist imprint on the ground. Li, who had quickly dodged the attack, looked at the monster and said to himself that this was truly a disaster. The terrified players, trembling, asked if this was real because they had just passed the first floor, so they wondered how they were supposed to fight this. And as the girl pleaded for help, saying she didn't want to die, Li said to himself that this was bad because everyone had fallen into a panic. But the monster quickly launched another attack on a player, yet before it could hit, Li, moving very swiftly, saved them and said that the second floor mission hadn't even started yet, so he asked what the rabbit was really doing. Then, he looked at the rabbit, who was in a fetal position, and thought that maybe the rabbit was putting on a show to make them take the mission seriously, meaning this was just a preview of how things would go. So, he concluded that the rabbit didn't intend to harm them. However, the monster attacked again, injuring 3 players. But Jun and Kim started fighting back, even though it had no effect on the monster. Li, who had seen the monster's attacks, thought that this wasn't just for show because the monster was really trying to kill them. And while Icial healed the wounded, Li thought that no one had died so far, but that wouldn't last long. But at the same time, the monster began preparing another attack, so Li, seeing it, told everyone to retreat, and as he readied himself, he thought that this wasn't the time to worry about what others thought because if he couldn't stop it, then everyone would die. So, with all his strength, he began using the synergy between the invincible sword and a piercing strike. The players who saw Lee manage to defeat the monster changed their expressions to one of great surprise, but the most shocked was our protagonist. He couldn't believe he had defeated it. And while the players stood in silence, they quickly started shouting Lee's name, but as he looked at his sword, he wondered if it was really that powerful because this was truly different from everything he had experienced so far. However, the system informed him that he would be in a state of exhaustion for a few minutes because he had used power beyond his limits. So, he began to fall, and while falling, he thought that this was the end. But after a few minutes, he started to open his eyes, and the system informed him that the exhaustion state had been lifted. The companions, seeing that he had awakened, began to feel relieved, but Juno, with tears and deeply moved, said he couldn't believe that Lee had acted so humbly despite being so powerful. Even losing consciousness at the last moment was perfect, but Lee, while trying to stand up, asked what had happened to the great disaster. The rabbit, with a wide smile, said that the disaster had been cancelled because it was just to give them a glimpse of the situation. This left Lee quite surprised because it turned out he was right. The rabbit continued, saying that perhaps this wasn't too interesting because everyone was being too friendly to each other even though they had almost died. As the rabbit began to walk slowly, it told everyone that the fact that death could occur at any moment meant that the people around them might be the ones who would kill them. When everyone started feeling sufficiently nervous, the rabbit said it had delivered its message, and then left. After the rabbit left, Lee gritted his teeth and thought that his intentions had been so clear, and then wondered if there was anything they could do about it. A few minutes later, Juno suggested that if they couldn't find the doppelgangers, they should start killing each other. However, another player said they needed to find a way to handle the situation quickly. Another player tried to suggest that they could mark each other in some way. But someone else pointed out that the doppelgangers shared their memories, so they wondered what they should do. Lee, who had overheard the entire conversation, called everyone's attention and then said he had something on his mind. While standing up, he declared that during this mission, he would be the only one to act. However, all the players who heard him were very confused. Lee then told them that they shouldn't do anything and should gather at the highest point on the second floor. If anyone else tried to do what he was doing, they should consider that person a doppelganger and work together to defeat them. However, Sechin, a former Special Forces member and survival expert, asked Lee if that was his plan. She said she understood that Lee was quite capable despite his low level, but she questioned why they should follow his plan so obediently. Lee seriously asked if she remembered what the rabbit had said earlier, that there was no reward for a player who killed a doppelganger, but if a player killed another player, they could earn stat points and gold. This meant that the people around them could be the ones who would kill them. Although the instructions told them to fight the doppelgangers, what the tower really wanted was for them to kill each other. So, with great seriousness, he said that he didn't want the tower to mess with him anymore, and because of that, he believed this was the best solution. However, the girl remained unsatisfied. June then raised his hand and said that he agreed, and that they really could minimize the damage. He then told Lee with a very serious look that asking him to take on that role meant he had a way to distinguish who the doppelgangers were. Lee, hearing this, smiled and said that, of course, he had a way. We then transitioned to a scene where the second floor mission had begun, and the current number of members was both players and doppelgangers. After that, we returned to Kim, who said he couldn't believe they were being asked to gather at the peak without doing anything. Even though it was Lee who suggested it, he still felt it was too reckless, so he complained because he really didn't like climbing mountains. However, at the same time, he realized there was someone else, so he tried to hide behind a tree. When Kim prepared his attack, Lee called out to him and said that he was so big that he could see him behind the tree. Kim, seeing who it was, with a wide smile, said that it was just his brother, and as Kim thought it was a doppelganger, he was quickly sliced in half by Lee. We then flash back to a few minutes earlier, where Lee saw a notification from the guide informing him that the first player to reach a certain stat level in sensitivity would receive the Unrivaled Senses ability as a reward for being the first to achieve this feat. This ability would help in identifying doppelgangers. Seeing the notification, he said that he was actually a little scared after saying he was sure he could distinguish who the doppelgangers were. But just then, the notification window appeared at the perfect moment, so he started using his gold to increase his sensitivity points. You are the first to reach the stat level in sensitivity and have acquired Unrivaled Senses. Your senses will be so sharp that you will be able to gather information about someone as long as they are within a certain range of you. As Lee observed his hands, he said that he finally managed to get the ability after spending almost half of his gold. However, he felt as if his entire world had been given a sensory filter, and it was pretty cool. At the same time, he heard some mumbling and said that the voice came from Kim, who was complaining about having to climb the mountain. Lee, hearing it so clearly despite being quite far away, said it was surprising. However, he detected a very unpleasant smell, so he looked at Kim, and upon seeing him, realized it was a doppelganger. After that, we returned to the present, where the doppelganger Kim had been sliced in half. Lee, recalling what had happened, said that it acted like the real one right up until it died. However, he felt bad for killing it. Still, now that he had confirmed his ability to distinguish the doppelgangers, he hoped the others would follow his instructions. Since June agreed, the others agreed to follow the plan, but he didn't know what could happen in real time and hoped nothing would happen until they reached the highest point on that map. However, at that moment, the system notified them that a player had died. The current number of members was both players and doppelgangers. Not believing the notification, he wondered with a grim expression if a player had already died. He also wondered if the doppelgangers had started killing people or if it had been done by a player. Not knowing what had happened, he said there was no way to conclude what had occurred. So, he quickly began running at full speed because he needed to find the killer as soon as possible. While climbing a tree to get a better view of the area, he cursed, saying that while he was eliminating a doppelganger, another player had also been killed. He asked where the killer was, but at the same time, he noticed someone. He quickly turned around and saw a doppelganger who had just killed a player. Upon finding them, he immediately attacked the doppelganger, causing several injuries. The doppelganger was killed. The number of remaining doppelganger players is now Lee. While observing the doppelganger, he thought that the doppelganger might be the killer, but it turned out to be different from what he had assumed. Nevertheless, he was glad to have killed them before they could cause more harm. However, at the same time, June, who was severely injured, was lying among the bushes. He asked if it was really Lee, and as he fell, he told Lee to be careful of the doppelganger before passing out. A few minutes later, Lee helped June move, but with difficulty speaking, June expressed his regret, saying that if he hadn't let the doppelganger escape, others wouldn't have died. Angrily, he said that the thought of someone who looked like him roaming around and hurting others made him feel terrible. Hearing this, Lee told him it wasn't his fault because they were all victims of the tower and should focus on escaping the tower safely. At the same time, he saw two people, Isial and Juno, where Isial sighed in relief, saying that both had survived and she was worried after hearing that players had died. Juno added that he was also worried and couldn't believe that two players had been killed, but Isial, as she began to use her magic, asked June if he was injured because she was going to heal him. However, Lee drew his sword and told June to step back because the two were doppelganger. Hearing that, the expressions of both doppelganger immediately changed, and one of Juno doppelganger attacked, asking Lee if he held a grudge for what happened on the death mission. While June told Lee to take care of Joel, he wondered why the doppelganger were so bold in front of him, especially if one of them had Isial's memories, meaning they knew how strong she really was. But at the same time, Isial's doppelganger moved from behind Lee. However, Lee noticed in time, dodging the attack, but Juno doppelganger quickly took advantage of the situation to attack him as well. Lee, realizing this, dodged the attack by jumping and then maneuvered in the air. As he landed on the ground, an arrow was aimed at his head, but it struck a tree as Lee narrowly avoided it. As Lee observed who shot the arrow, it turned out to be June, who, with a different expression, said it was unfortunate because he thought he had achieved checkmate. While the doppelganger started walking to stand beside June, we flash back to a few minutes earlier where Lee had taken out one of the doppelganger, but June saw Lee, so he immediately smiled, and as June drew his arrow, it was mentioned that he used to work as a fisherman. He then stabbed his own arrow into his back to represent himself as bait, and with a big evil grin, he said that now he was going to start a human hunt. After that, we return to the present where June tells Lee that he spoke in dialect without realizing it, and it seems he was too excited. He then asked Lee what he felt at that moment. Furthermore, he asked if Lee felt emotions of betrayal, futility, or anger while laughing hysterically. However, Lee, with a smile, said he wondered if June would show his true colors, and upon seeing him, it seemed June was crazier than he thought. June, hearing this, said that Lee spoke as if he knew June would stab him in the back, but as Lee helped him walk, he stared at him sharply. So, he said that he could see others' status windows, and their stats had increased drastically, making it clear that June was the killer. However, June said that this was becoming more interesting over time and asked if Lee had received help from the tower because he was so jealous of it. However, Lee asked why June did it, as he had come to the point of killing others for gold and stats. June, while laughing, asked if he needed a reason because in this beautiful world, if he killed people, not only was he not punished, but he was also rewarded. Then, as he released his arrow, he asked how they could not kill anyone, and while Lee remembered June earlier, he wondered if he had a situation that made him do it, but he was wrong. As the arrow quickly headed towards him, he dodged it to slide towards Kim Junan. Meanwhile, it was said that Kim Junan was just wearing a mask and had been holding back for a moment like this, and that type was just a simple psychopathic killer. But at the same time, the doppelganger saw that Lee was moving quickly toward June, and they both attacked Lee. Lee, after dodging and putting some distance between him and the doppelganger, quickly saw an arrow aimed at him. However, he sliced the arrow in two. But there was a second arrow aimed at his head, so he quickly turned to avoid the arrow, which hit a tree, leaving a large hole. Lee, seeing the attack, said that Kin hadn't shown all his cards yet. Then he turned towards the doppelganger and said that the best hand-to-hand fighter, healer in the area, and a stronger long-range attacker than the doppelganger formed a combination with no gaps. So, he told King Junsi that he didn't know how to convince the doppelganger, but it seemed like he was well prepared. Kim June, with a wide smile, said that if he wanted to catch something big, he had to do that. Besides, he thought it would fall more easily, but it was quite tough. While manipulating an arrow in his hand, he said that it was much better because he could watch it fight in pain until death. Then he began to tense his bow while asking the doppelganger what they were doing, as it was time to raise their net and attack simultaneously. However, Lee, with a serious expression, started to activate his perfect senses, allowing him to see all around him. As the enemies approached, he said while observing the doppelganger stats that they were a very balanced group. However, against overwhelming power, a good team composition means nothing. The current number of doppelganger players. Ken, seeing Lee easily defeat the doppelganger, began to feel quite nervous. Then he knelt on the ground and begged Lee with tears to spare his life, saying that he had been obsessed with the reward and had gone mad for a moment. He was shocked after seeing how strong Lee was, realizing that he had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Trembling, he begged Lee to send him to hell just this once. However, Lee quickly cut him in half. As Lee's upper half floated in the air, he cursed and said that his bait was not just to catch small fish but something bigger. The current number of doppelganger players. With Lee's sword drenched in blood, he said that he had to kill a living human. But at the same time, the system notified him that the player who accepted the challenge to become a star killer had died. You have gained the opportunity to become the star killer instead. If you accept the challenge to become a star killer, you will receive a stat boost and support from the doppelganger. If you ultimately become the star killer, you will receive great benefits. Meanwhile, he was surrounded by a mist that began to gather at one point, transforming into some sort of doppelganger extending a hand. While the system asked if he wanted to accept the challenge, Lee saw the notification and said that was why Kim Jun-sun could lead the doppelganger. The benefits you will receive when you become the star killer: legendary rank equipment, legendary rank abilities, rapid stat point increase, exclusive star killer rank. Seeing these benefits, Lee wondered why there were such absurd rewards. However, he started to recall what happened with the doppelganger and said that although he didn't like killing the doppelganger, he could penetrate them because he knew they weren't human. But now, he was facing a situation where he had to fight against humans, and one of them might be another challenger trying to become the star killer. It could even be someone who, in the future, would become the star killer. So he looked at all the notifications and then headed to the bar that asked if he wanted to accept the challenge. But at the same time, he refused the challenge because he wouldn't become a crazy psychopath like June. After that, Lee arrived with other players, where Kim, with his typical expression, asked why he was late. Lee looked at him, drew his sword, and said that he had to become a crazy psychopath. Then he told everyone that he knew it was hard to follow his proposal. So he thanked them for following him. While some players had doppelganger beside them, they asked what they should do now. Others asked if Lee could really distinguish who the doppelganger was. He answered firmly and said that first. However, at the same time, someone said that he thanked everyone for following his instructions. As someone approached the group, Lee turned around, saw him, and said that he had appeared. It was then revealed that the players were confused because there were two Lees. The players asked which of the two Lees they could trust. Someone asked if Lee had already predicted this situation. While the two Lees stared at each other, the Real Lee said that this situation was complicated, and he had planned to eliminate his duplicate before getting here. However, his plan failed due to an unexpected variable known as June. In that situation, it was as if a chess match was unfolding between him and his duplicate. In the middle of this situation, a player asked who the real Lee was, while another wanted more explanation. Lee revealed that he had eliminated several duplicates. 8 people had either a dead duplicate or a dead player. If he revealed the identities of the 5 duplicates he eliminated, he was confident he could prove that he was the real player. As he began to name them, his duplicate listed different names except for Lee and Isial, claiming that their duplicates had been eliminated. This caused confusion among the players. Lee tried to think of a way to prove he was the real player, but his duplicate acted first, encouraging everyone to think carefully. Isial and a red-haired player were reminded that they had once been in the same group and had built trust. He argued that it was more likely he had eliminated their duplicates. Lee realized that his duplicate had taken the first step, causing the players to start doubting him. A woman in the back asked if this wasn't too obvious, but Isial mentioned that there was no guarantee that it wasn't possible. While everyone was thinking, the duplicate Lee claimed that if his false statements were true, then June was a duplicate, meaning he had killed the real June. June was known as a kind and true leader who encouraged them during difficult times. The duplicate Lee questioned whether they could trust Lee, who was suspected of being a killer. Lee admitted that he didn't know how June died, but this situation worked in his favor. His duplicate then tried to steer the opinion by stating that Lee was the duplicate. The players, starting to be swayed, considered attacking Lee. However, Isial reminded them not to draw conclusions based on one side of the story. Lee agreed and urged caution. Despite this, another player believed there was no time because a great disaster was approaching. Lee silently praised his duplicate's clever strategy. Lee admitted that he did kill June, and his duplicate felt disappointed, thinking Lee had given up. Lee, with determination, reveals that June is a traitor. However, the attack on June's duplicate fails to eliminate him. Lee's duplicate questions Lee's actions, but suddenly, Lee appears, asking if June is truly a traitor. Lee manipulates the situation to sway opinions. Lee states that if a duplicate kills someone, a notification appears, so duplicates won't kill recklessly. Lee could prove himself by eliminating the duplicate, but instead, he accuses June of being a traitor. This provokes anger in a woman who remembers June's kindness. The woman becomes furious but is suddenly stopped by an arrow from June's duplicate. The number of players and duplicates decreases. Lee's duplicate laughs in satisfaction, but suddenly, June's duplicate is taken down by Sechin. Sechin apologizes to Lee for having doubted him. The players finally realize that June was the duplicate, making Lee the real player. They prepare to face the next challenge. He needs the other players, stating that they will follow his lead, while at the same time, he recalls bad moments from the past. With a small smile, he says it feels like déjà vu. So, with a very confident look, he tells them all about his final plan. Meanwhile, his doppelganger charges towards him, saying that now, after all this has happened, it's all or nothing. Even so, Lee manages to dodge his doppelganger's attack with his sword, and while continuing to fight his doppelganger, he tells the others to use all the gold they have to upgrade their stats. All the players then start upgrading their stats, causing their doppelganger to become unmatched, as all the players grow stronger than before. After the players defeat all the doppelganger, they are informed that the doppelganger stats were the same as the players when they first entered the second floor, so they could complete the mission without any additional casualties because they upgraded their stats with gold. However, Sechin curses because if it weren't for June, the trash, they could have survived without anyone dying. Lee, upon hearing this, says that Sechin might be the most disappointed because he was in the same group as June. Furthermore, he also feels disappointed because his goal was to clear the second floor safely without anyone dying. However, he wonders how the situation is in other regions, as it might be worse than in their area, considering other regions don't have someone like him to guide them. If others have taken the path of the Starkiller, the situation would be very complicated for them, and the battles ahead might be more intense. Although he is still weak, he believes there is a strong reason why he has the special ability to read the guide. So, clenching his fist, he says to himself that although not everything he has experienced so far has been good, as long as there are people who believe in him, he will do everything he can to save as many people as possible. However, at that moment, his thoughts are interrupted by Sechin, who thanks him for surviving thanks to Lee. But Lee says it was because everyone followed his plan. Sechin says that seeing himself still on level 2 despite contributing more, perhaps he has been given a special ability instead, making his level up slower. Hearing this, Lee thinks that Sechin's caution and decision-making skills are impressive, which will be very useful in the future. However, at that moment, Sechin begins to bow while sincerely apologizing for doubting and underestimating him. The other players also start to apologize to Lee, who tells them they don't need to apologize. However, Kim laughs heartily and calls them bad at recognizing someone's true potential, saying they should be like him. However, Isial interrupts, saying that she was the first to notice how extraordinary Lee is, who at that time was biting his fist, mentioning that he wanted to apologize again but with tears. Then, we shift to Sechin, who tells Lee that he knows what he is about to say might sound shameless after everything that has happened, but he wants Lee to lead them from that point onward. This greatly surprises Lee, but he smiles and agrees. Then, we move to a few minutes before the mission ends, when the system informs them of the remaining number of doppelganger players, 1. The players, realizing that one still remains, start saying that they have defeated all the doppelganger. While the players begin to search for the last doppelganger, Lee approaches some bushes and quickly eliminates the last doppelganger. The system notifies them that the doppelganger has been killed and that the mission is complete. We return to the present, where a loudspeaker informs the players that the gold reward will be distributed according to their contribution. The players rejoice as they also receive gold. However, Kim begins to laugh and then strikes a pose, as he is the one who received the gold. While Kim shows off his gold, Lee smiles, realizing that it seems everyone got gold because they followed his plan, and he's happy that everyone received something. This shows that he also received gold. However, at that moment, the system informs him that because he received more than a certain amount, his store rank will increase. So, while looking at the new items in the store, he thinks that's how the system works, and if he wants to buy rare and higher tier items, he needs to upgrade his store rank. However, what he needs now is to upgrade his basic sword level. The level of his basic sword increases. After receiving the notification, he thinks, while remembering the disaster monster, that although he didn't know it at the time, he was using a higher level sword, which is why he passed out after using it. If he can use that type of sword just with gold, it's really a cheap price. With that, he finishes shopping. However, at that moment, he looks towards Isial, who receives a notification that Lee has shared gold with her. Seeing the notification, Isial asks Lee why he suddenly gave her gold. Lee replies that she can keep it because when they were fighting the kobolds and doppelganger, it would have been much harder for them to win if it weren't for her. In a world where they have to take others' lives to survive, the reason they can laugh while trusting each other is because they can help one another. So, he says that it's all thanks to Isial. Hearing this, Isial is silent for a few seconds, then confidently tells Lee that she will become stronger. Then, Isial receives a notification that her Healing Hands ability has increased. Kim, seeing the notification that Lee has shared gold with him, looks at his older brother, who tells him not to do anything strange and to keep up the good work. While Kim leaves, he thinks that Kim is quite competent and could become very useful. This would be useful if it helped him become stronger, but at the same time, he was distracted by Kim calling out to him. With a strange expression, he said that from that moment on, Kim's wish was his command and that he only needed to say what he needed. However, Lee quickly drew his sword and gripped it tightly, thinking that the time had come to test his level 3 basic sword. The scene then changed, with the system notifying everyone that the third floor mission had begun. The third floor mission was a siege war, and this would be the first time you encounter players from other regions. The conditions were clear: your group's mission was to attack, destroy the castle, and seize the altar. Time remaining, a few hours. Penalty for failure, unknown. You have obtained a limited time item, a return crystal, which can only be used on the third floor. While trying to guess the function of the return crystal, Lee saw one of the players observing the castle and asked if this meant they had to kill people. Another player asked what the return crystal was, but at the same time, the guide system informed Lee of something. When he learned the function of the return crystal, he called out to Kim to start attacking immediately, saying that Kim had promised to do whatever was asked of him. The scene then shifted to Kim climbing up the castle, and as he placed his hand on his neck, he said that Lee should have just used words and could have said that he wouldn't actually die here. Even if he were killed on this floor, the return crystal would bring him back to the starting location when he died. As Kim reached the castle gate, he remembered that Lee had said if he did reconnaissance for them, he would receive gold. So, with great enthusiasm, he shouted that he would destroy everything while starting to smash the gate, where the system notified them that the castle gate's durability had decreased. The castle gate's durability dropped %. Kim continued to pound the gate until it finally shattered completely. The castle gate opened for 2 seconds before being reset, and as Kim entered the castle, he remarked that there was no way a simple castle gate could withstand his power. The castle gate was restored, but at the same time, he turned around and saw 2 guards on top of the castle wall. Then he turned left, where the altar was, and realized that there were people around it. However, he remembered that Lee had asked him not to kill anyone because they would figure out the return crystal's function, but with a big smile, he thought that even though Lee had asked him not to do it, they were just trash who feared him. As he walked toward the altar, he thought he would destroy them all. However, at that moment, he was attacked, hitting his face, and as Kim started to bleed and complained about the pain, he wondered what had just happened. Then he looked up toward the altar and wondered if it could be a firearm. Back with Lee, Kim recounted what had happened. He said it fired some sort of magical bullet that hurt like hell. Hearing his story, Lee thought it was crazy because firearms shouldn't be obtainable at this stage, and the proof was that even Sechin, whose class was a warrior, didn't have a firearm. However, another possibility was a Star Slayer, so he thought this would be a tough battle. However, at that moment, Isial quickly turned toward him to say that he didn't need to worry because she would protect his back. Not only would she help, but all the players raised their voices and weapons, saying they were ready too and that he should rely on them. Seeing them, Lee smiled and confidently said he would tell them his plan from that moment on. The scene then shifted to the castle where this player was very nervous and frightened. We see that the person holding the weapon was sitting on another player, but the other player also seemed scared. Back to Lee, who was using the great advantage he gained during the mission on the second floor, the perfect sense, which allowed him to see from a distance. As he looked at the players, he thought that there were only 2 guards at the top of the castle wall, as Kim had mentioned. As Kim began to approach the castle, Isial told Lee that if Kim returned, the enemies would figure out the function of the return crystal. Lee said they wouldn't realize it because they might think about it, but they couldn't be sure. Besides, it was more likely they would think it was something only Kim could do. However, at the same time, the players in the castle began to aim their bows and quickly fired arrows simultaneously at Kim, who shouted that this was completely different from what had just happened. However, the 2 arrows were destroyed by Lee, who, while in the air, said that this gave them a chance to then land on Kim's shoulders and slide into the castle to quickly take down 2 players from the opposing team. They only had one chance. Juno, who saw what Lee had done, said with a wide smile that the enemies would soon figure out how to use the return crystal because of the failed attack on the first turn. Therefore, they had to defeat them immediately. All the other players started moving toward the castle gate, where Kim said he could smash the gate with just 5 stone punches. So, the others had to make sure to follow him closely. He prepared his stone punch, but at the same time, before hitting the castle gate, he was attacked. The gate's durability was destroyed in 1 blow %, and the gate could no longer be restored. As Lee checked on his comrades to make sure they were okay, he was distracted by a player lying on the ground. He then said he didn't know why he had let them live, but that half-hearted mentality would lead him to death because that crazy woman would take advantage of it. However, as Lee looked at him, he thought that it could indeed happen, where we are shown that the girl was indeed a Star Slayer, and her class was a high-level swordsman. Furthermore, she also had the Magic Pala ability at level 3, and her stats were above average and had gold. Lee, seeing those stats, was very surprised and thought she was indeed a Star Slayer and, given her level, she must have killed everyone on the second floor. However, at the same time, the girl named Seoyin noticed Lee's presence. So, she quickly shot at him, hitting the target. Lee, who had been shot, took cover behind the castle wall and used a healing potion, thinking that he hadn't expected to be shot from that distance. It made him realize that the enemy was more hostile than he had anticipated, with no doubt about it. Meanwhile, as he lifted his shirt, he was glad he had prepared beforehand, an advanced leather armor with 0 physical defense and enhanced magical defense. Then, he noticed that the assassin's bullet was draining his MP. If the assassin was using the same type of shop he was, they shouldn't have been able to purchase mana recovery items. Knowing this, he jumped down, and as his comrades moved to accompany him, he thought that the assassin only had a few magical bullets left, so they had to break through. So, everyone began moving toward the altar, but the assassin quickly used their weapon to shoot one of the players who had asked Lee how they would get past the bullets to reach the altar. Lee said that the assassin wasn't capable of using bullets that could harm Kim at the brink of death. Of course, since they were called magical bullets, they could drain MP. So, upon hearing that, Lee mentioned that the amount of MP would be crucial. Then Lee said it was true. We then shift to the battle where the player who had been shot began to heal, and as everyone moved toward the altar, the assassin continued shooting at them. However, Lee's group of players kept healing thanks to Isial's ability. The assassin, realizing this, quickly kicked a human chair to alert the others while pointing their gun to get them to leave. Lee, heading toward the altar, thought that what happened from this point on would determine how everything ended, and if the battle broke out, there would be comrades dying from the magical bullets, so they needed to reach the altar as quickly as possible. However, at the same time, two opposing players launched an attack, but Lee dodged the first player with a powerful kick, then avoided the second player by quickly delivering a blow to the nape, knocking them out. But at the same time, a magical bullet aimed at his head, and Lee blocked it with his sword, causing him to lose his weapon. The assassin, seeing this, thought that Lee had reacted to the shot, so he quickly aimed at Junho's head. Seeing one of his comrades defeated, he looked around and thought that more and more people would end up dead. With clenched teeth, Lee thought that the assassin probably didn't know they would return even after dying. So, he wondered how the assassin could wear such a face while killing people, and with a small smile, said that the small group of trash was interesting. Hearing this, Lee became extremely angry, then began gripping his sword and quickly activated the level 3 basic swordsman ability. After that, we shift to Kim, who was with two opposing players, but Kim, while using his ability, said that it was over because his brother had reached the altar, so he didn't need to hold back anymore. Using the level 2 stone fist, and as the players fighting Kim fell unconscious, we returned to Lee, where the assassin asked who Lee was because he was so strong despite being only level 2. But Lee, smiling, asked if it wasn't strange for him to reach that level so quickly. This made the assassin think, but at the same time, the platform they were on began to glow, where the system notified them that they had occupied altar 1 of 3. Please remove the opposing players from the altar. Hearing this notification, Lee thought that they needed 3 people to fully occupy the altar, but before that, he had to deal with his opponent. Quickly, the assassin took control by shooting, but Lee quickly countered with his sword. However, the assassin blocked the attack with his weapon, and as Lee launched several attacks, the assassin, while dodging, wondered how Lee could react to his shots. But at the same time, Lee prepared to launch a powerful attack, where the assassin dodged with a leap and quickly fired 2 shots, his expression completely changing to one of shock as Lee managed to dodge both shots. Smiling, the assassin said that Lee seemed like a swordsman and one of the strongest players in his area. Junho was known as a genius in ping-pong. In professional matches, where a game was ongoing, it wasn't easy to return all the balls just by using your eyes. That's why, as the level of the game increased, more players read their opponent's posture or watch them closely, and the ability to do so and predict where the ball would come from was considered extraordinary. Lee's nickname when he was a professional ping-pong player was the prediction genius, and he had gained an advantage thanks to clap. After the assassin dodged Lee's attack, it was said while looking at Lee that the bastard had higher stats than him. But at the same time, Sechin told Lee that they were done. Kim commented that they needed to finish it quickly before the assassin returned. Hearing this, the assassin asked if the return crystal functioned as a revival tool. Lee replied by saying that it did, though there was no point in knowing that now. But with a serious look, Lee said that even though the assassin had a hidden ability that allowed him to land a hit, he would be able to endure it. So, he prepared again because he just needed to take the risk of damage and make sure to finish it. But at the same time, the assassin asked Lee if he believed that he had won. We see that he was spending his gold to upgrade his shooting ability to level 4. When Lee saw this, he quickly charged at him. But as he saw Lee coming, the assassin began to stop him, rendering him completely helpless. While his comrades ran toward him, calling his name, the system notified them that the mission on the 3rd floor was completed.